Hello and welcome to Kinboshi Radio, and we have got a bit of a special episode today. Sadly, Nick cannot join me because he's out there having a real life as a real human being, but I am just apparently a sumo loser, so I have to rope other people into this, and we are joined by Nick and I's friend Phil, who is interesting because, Phil, say hey and tell the people what you do for a living.
Hey there, I'm Phil. I'm a physical therapist, so I rehab folks after injuries or illness and get them back to playing their best or living their life again.
Which I think is real. Well, actually, the living your life again is going to be real interesting. But in our context, I think everybody now is smart enough to know what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about injuries in sumo, kind of comparing them to a quote-unquote normal person who does not smash into 400-pound men for a living. But Phil, to start things off then, like, we know that you rehab people. Everyone, if you've had a relative who's gotten knee replacements or things like that, that's kind of the stuff we're talking about, is rebuilding muscle strength after these major reconstructive surgeries. But in general, the people you're working with are everyday Joes like you and me. But that's not entirely what we're talking about in sumo, right? Like, tell me a little specifically about what, like, carrying this extra weight can do to someone.
Yeah, so this article found that 48%, where is it here? 31% of high school wrestlers and 43% of college wrestlers showed abnormal findings in their knee x-rays. So nearly a third to a half of these wrestlers, even though they're only, 16 to 20 years old, are already showing damage to their knees.
And this is really, this is a bummer because, like you talked about, your job is to get people back to their normal life after these injuries and this wear and tear. But something that Nick and I have talked about a lot on the pod is Takakeisho, and this idea that, like, he feels older than he is. The man's 26 years old, but he does not have a 26-year-old's body. And this is just, like, data and information, and a lot of it that is indeed the case. He does not have a 26-year-old's body because these 16-year-olds are showing signs. Like, when would you expect a normal person living a normal life? So I know people, like my father-in-law works at the factory floor at an automotive plant, and so, like, his knees were shot by the time he was 40. That's not what we're talking about. We're just a normal person. When would you expect them to start seeing signs of arthritis in their knees?
I mean, everyone is a little bit different. 40 years old is not unusual, but most people don't see signs of where it becomes an issue until, 60s or 70s.
So, wow. So hypothetically, like, again, you bring up a good point, and I need you to be the voice of reason here as the expert for sure to keep me in line. But, like, yeah, so like a 16-year-old experiencing life changes that generally, like, 7 times out of 10 you shouldn't see until you're 60.
Yeah. So most of the time it's you don't see those kinds of, you don't need to have any sort of intervention unless there's a traumatic injury. Not until they're, in their 70s.
Right. And so that's where, again, there can be other circumstances, a car crash, a motorcycle accident, all sorts of things.
Right.
Yeah. But that we've talked before about how, like, the Tachi is a car crash. You are just like, but in the softest terms, you're riding your bicycle down a 40-meter ramp and just hitting a wall. Right.
Yeah. I mean, you're throwing a 400-pound man against another 400-pound man, and these are not just falling into each other. They're slamming into each other with as much force as they can generate.
That's another good point. It's not a stationary object and a moving object. It's two moving objects moving towards each other, smashing in. And so that's where these sports injuries that a lot of us in various sports that are more popular in America are more familiar with, they happen in sumo too, but maybe more frequently and more severely. And for the sake of this episode, just for limiting the scope of discussion, a little later here, we're going to compare Tochinoshin and Wakatakakage. And the reason for that is that these guys, like Tochi just retired, and sort of making the rounds right now is this news where Hakuho actually said he believes that if Tochinoshin had managed to stay healthy, he thinks he would have been Yokozuna. Now, obviously, that concept, the idea of, like, yeah, in sumo, a lot of guys could have stayed healthy and made Yokozuna. That's kind of one of the impressive parts of getting to Yokozuna is it proves you have that longevity, or in the case of someone like Terano Fuji, it proves that you have the wherewithal to battle through lacking that longevity and still make it there, and still be grinding. But it still is important to look at what happened in these guys' careers, who they could have been, what injuries do to them, and specifically in this case, because of the case study we're going to look at, we want to talk about knees and ACL injuries. So Phil, like at your hospital, what are some of the generic procedures if someone does their ACL? So
an ACL reconstruction is a relatively simple process that's an outpatient procedure at most hospitals. They basically take either a sample of tendon from one of your muscles or from a cadaver, and they drill some holes in your knee, and they string it in there and anchor it back down to replace the ligament that's been torn.
What's the preferred method? Is it like for the sake of like antibodies and stuff, is it preferred that they take a piece of tendon from your own body?
It kind of depends. Usually the taking one from your own muscles can slow recovery a little bit, just because you're not just cutting into the bones, you're also cutting out a section of that muscle.
So it's creating additional damage. Yeah.
Right. But it's generally preferred because then you don't have to like introduce foreign material into your body. You know, your body is much easier to accept its own cells, its own material, you know?
Yeah, for sure. But then, yeah, so causing additional damage as you go. What for a regular person, let's say me, I am out of shape and I'm outside playing pickup soccer with my friends and I tear my ACL, like, what are we looking at once this surgery is done? They take a piece of my own body and replace that specific part of my structure. What am I looking at?
So usually recovery after an injury like that, it's relatively quick. Just a clean ACL tear, it's pretty quick. It's, 8 weeks. You're kind of back to returning to training in sport, and then probably 2 to 3 months or 3 to 6 months before you're returning to sport. A lot of times, though, with an ACL injury, especially in these intense sports, it's not just an ACL. There's often an ACL plus a meniscus injury.
Oh, tell us about that then. Yeah.
So yeah, meniscus is basically the cushion between the two bones of your knee, right? You've got your upper leg bone and your lower leg bone. Mm-hmm. There's a cushion in between that helps that joint make its movement. If that pad gets torn, it needs to be repaired. It can impair if it's not. When it is damaged, it can impede the movement. It can get in the way of all kinds of stuff. So often they will repair it either by trimming off the part that was torn or, stitching it back together. But the meniscus is a very non-vascular structure, so there's not a lot of blood flow into it.
So less
it
healing.
Recovers very slowly.
Yeah. So it's worse, and that we've heard that in sports, like when you hear if it's ACL or ACL plus MCL. So how about in American sports that people are more familiar with, then what are the timelines we're looking at in these sports-related knee injuries, where often, like you said, it's not simply just an ACL?
Right. So this article that I found talks about ACL reconstructions in professional athletes in the U.S. sports. So, the NHL, the NFL, the NBA, those sports that are not as impactful as sumo, but definitely of the stuff we have data for. Hockey is a very high contact sport.
Yeah, it's a sport where literally like you're allowed to smash guys into walls.
Right. And this article is talking about typically in professional sports, this had a return to play of about 250 days.
Whew.
So that's what is that? 9 months worth?
Yeah.
8 months? Yeah. It's a long recovery time. But then we're looking at these sumo wrestlers, and they have a incentive to return to their combat as soon as possible.
Right. This is interesting. Oh man, this is interesting on so many levels. So when we talk about collective bargaining agreements in American sports, like hilariously, American sports being one of the last places where unions actually exist. But these players' unions, like their contracts are guaranteed. So if they're injured and they're not playing, they still get their money. They still have their roster slot. Now that depends on if a guy is on an expiring contract or not. But the idea being you don't stop being a member of the team just because you sit out for recovery, and there on some level is incentive for the team to make sure that you don't have a recurring injury. But sumo, while you do have a heiya and an oyakata, you have teammates-ish, but it's an individual sport, right? Like what you do matters. And the JSA, we love that promotion and relegation are part of sumo. It makes it more exciting. But this idea that being injured is no excuse for missing matches and you will plummet down the rankings. So both of the guys we're going to talk about here when we get into our case studies of Tochinoshin and Wakatakakage, so they both fell from Makuuchi all the way down to Makushita. They fell down to 3rd Division Sumo, which is non-salaried ranks. So like you're saying, that's a lot of incentive to rush the return that might not be there in these American sports.
Right. So they're trying their best to get back to fighting as soon as they can, and it might come at the cost of not giving enough time to recover. Right.
And do you think is the effect of that felt immediately, or is it more long term? So what I mean by that is, will they be less effective when they return, but then sort of play their way back into game shape? Or are they going to be able to return at game shape from this, but they're cutting off the tail end of their career? Is there any indication of one of those scenarios being more likely?
So I don't have any data on it, but either situation could happen, right? Because if you return to sport before you're fully healed, you could run the risk of just tearing it again, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. And setting you back that 6 months again, right?
Right.
But there's also, the more punishment you put on your knees, the more they'll wear out for later in your career. Like we're kind of seeing with Teruno Fuji, right? Like he punished his knees for years.
Yep.
And he's kind of struggling now with the health of his knees.
Right, and it's like it's almost like it's just the knees. Like his upper body strength is unquestionable. He still, when he gets that double arm grip on people, it's a vice. But you can sort of overpower him. We saw Tobizaru in the last Basho come at him with this massive leg kick that I think it looked like it took Teruno Fuji like 3 days to shake that off. Is that something that you would expect to see from these rushed ACL recoveries, this additional weight, this idea of childhood arthritis, all those kinds of conditions? Does it make it harder? Like, when someone gives you a stinger, like a quick a punch to a muscle or a joint, does that linger more on repaired ACLs than? The answer has to be yes, I guess.
Yeah, that would make sense. I guess I don't know any data about it, but yeah, I can imagine that like the more stress you put on it, the longer it'll last.
Right. So then let's dig into this. So those quotes, I was super interested. Nick and I are both on record. Like Tochinoshin is one of the reasons I got into sumo. This guy, I thought his fighting style was so cool. The like all strength, burly man kind of stuff, lifting guys out, guys who are even heavier than him and stuff like that. And it's pretty obvious that these kind of lift techniques are not going to be as successful on a knee. But just to couch our listeners in a little bit of history, in 2013, in the July Basho, Tochinoshin does his ACL. Ends up having to sit out 10 days. And then he, like Phil mentioned, he sat out 3 full tournaments because sumo, apparently the given prescription is that you sit out 6 months. You miss half a year, which is 180 days. And again, for comparison of the 4 major American sports, hockey, correct me if I'm wrong, Phil, but hockey actually has the shortest recovery time, which is surprising because of how physical it is, but it also gives us a good comparison for sumo. But hockey does 250 days. Is that right?
Hockey has, 258 days is what this represents. And the other U.S. sports, their average is 367 days between football and basketball and baseball. Like,
So, yeah.
that's a full year.
So these professional athletes, yeah, they sit out an entire year on average for this injury in order to come back fully healthy and make sure that they don't have any kind of recurring injuries. Even a sport like hockey, which maybe by American standards even rushes guys back, their version of rushing them back is still giving them more than 2 months additional rest than sumo allows. And we've talked about the pressures for that and things like that. But so Tochi sits out 3 basho, 6 months, 180 days, and then he comes back and he goes 7-0 in Makushita twice, winning the Yusho both times. And then in Juryo, he gets a 13-2 and wins that Yusho, and a 15-0 and wins that Yusho, and then comes back to Makuuchi and he goes 11-4 with a Fighting Spirit prize. In the case of Wakatakakage, what's interesting to me is how similar all of this is so far. Wakatakakage actually injures himself really late in the March 2023 Basho, but he also sits out 3 straight tournaments, which drops him to Makushita. But on his first tournament back, he goes 5-2. Then in his second Basho back, which was this most recent Basho, he goes 7-0. So by the Tochi numbers, we're looking like maybe we have 2 more tournaments, but it's kind of interesting that he didn't get 2 7-0s in his Makushita run. And Phil hinted at it earlier, which I'm glad you did, Phil, because I can't find, I think because it was so long ago and sometimes English language reports on injuries in sumo are harder to find, but it appears that Tochinoshin only did his ACL, whereas Wakatakakage did his ACL and MCL. He also did the meniscus. Is that, am I using the terminology right?
So just MCL is a different thing than meniscus. Just a different ligament in the knee.
Oh, okay. So meniscus. So he did his ACL and meniscus, so maybe that is why. Do you have any thought, like, when we look at these returns, basically, Tochinoshin, similar to Terunofuji, who you hinted at, Tochinoshin comes back and has a great basho, but then he really cools off. The best he does for the next 4 basho is a 9-win tournament. He just really struggles until, 2014. He comes back for the very last tournament of 2014 in Makuuchi. And in 2018, so 4 years later, he goes 14-1, wins his first and only Makuuchi Yusho, which is eventually what springboards him later that year to becoming an Ozeki, which we know he'll lose and recover and then lose again and watch that slow decline because of these injuries. So what I'm curious about is, do you think that Wakatakakage is walking into a trap, into a sumo trap here? Like, because it's a tiny sample size, but in the 2 basho he's come back, he has not even looked as good as Tochinoshin did when he returned. And he's also a little older. I don't know. What do you think?
I mean, it's hard to say, right? It could be that he's coming back a little more slowly because he's not training as intensely as Tochinoshin did on his return.
Okay.
So, like, there could be other features in here, too. So, like, if he doesn't train as intensely, he could give that extra little bit of recovery time even while fighting at a fairly competitive level. Very
interesting, because that's similar to Takakeisho. We've heard lots of people criticizing him, not last basho, but the basho before, where he wasn't taking practice bouts until just like the week before the tournament. And so some of the sumo hardliners were criticizing him for that, like calling him soft and stuff like that. But like you're saying, this is just a way you can squeeze every ounce of recovery out of the time you have available?
Yeah, exactly.
And so what kind of things are they doing for recovery for these lower body injuries? In this case, both of them hurting one knee. Like, what do you do? And when you have one leg that's not injured, but the other that is?
I mean, a lot of it is strengthening. Often after a knee injury, the quad muscle right on the top of the thigh there is the most affected. So getting that muscle to fire at 100% can be a challenge.
Oh, that's so important for a tachi, your quads.
Right.
Like, it's all quads and glutes, right?
Yep, we see these sumo wrestlers with just massive thighs. You know, their quads are just enormous muscles, and if they're not firing at 100%, they're not going to be able to compete in that tachi, right?
Yeah, and with Wakatakakage specifically, actually, I mean, we can look at both of them. Tochinoshin and Wakatakakage are both belt fighters, so what they need is to be quick to get inside and get the grip they want before their opponent gets a grip or blocks them. So like that quickness is what's important. That's how Tochi was able to get inside and go chest to chest with guys like he wants to. That's how Waka's supposed to get his arm inside and then win the positional battle.
Yeah, that speed is really important. So yeah, working on, strength. Sometimes they'll even use like electrical stimulation to get that muscle to fire more intensely than they could consciously fire it as it's recovering.
Really? What is the science there? So like we've heard of that, and we like, I don't know. I mean, for me as someone who knows nothing, like it's easy to see that as junk science. Like back in the day when we were kids, and people would sell those little ab workout stickers that you would stick to your abs, and they could say you can sit on the couch and it's like doing 1,000 sit-ups, which is not true. But what's the true science?
Well, there's an element of the like voluntary muscle contraction too. The purpose of the electrical stimulation is to train the muscle to react to your brain's commands again. So you have to pair this electrical stimulation with the conscious effort of contracting the muscle to get it to fire at 100% again.
Yeah, and sorry to interrupt. I'm interested. So does that mean, is Waka sitting on a machine doing leg presses, and with every time he pushes up, he has a trainer who's firing this electrode on his thigh?
It may be. It's a very typical protocol, is to have a machine that fires for 5 seconds and then a 5-second rest. So you can sit there on a leg press machine, fire the muscle, and then relax as that current stops.
Right. And then so these are typical American sports training techniques, but we know that sumo a lot of times is very, I mean, it's not, first of all, it's cool. Like Shiko is cool. But what would you expect Waka to have the same kind of recovery if they just have him in his dohyo and he's doing Shiko, which, first of all, his Heiya is notorious for actually being really cutting edge. So if anyone's going to be doing more modern science, I would actually expect it to them. But let's use this old-fashioned sense. Like, what would the difference be between someone just sitting there doing Shiko, trying to build that strength back, versus someone using this new kind of technology? And it's not new. It's new to sumo, but it's not new in general. But like using a leg press machine and electric stimulation as opposed to just doing sumo stamping, Shiko.
I mean, I guess I don't have any numbers on that for you, but I can imagine that it would help recover a little bit faster, And in sports, it's that every little bit is what they're looking for. Right.
And I guess what I'm curious, so that's bad on me, but to be more like the wear and tear. So like we started this talking about 16-year-old kids in Japan who do sumo, who are big for their age, but they're not the gargantuan, they're not Diamami, you know what I mean?
Right.
And they're developing arthritis. So like what would sumo stamping do to someone who's trying to recover from this injury and this surgery?
I mean, it depends on at what point in your recovery you're doing it, right? Because that stamping is an important part of withstanding the impact forces that you see in sumo. But if you start it too early, it could be doing more harm than good,
Yeah, okay, so there is some obviousness of it, but that is interesting too, about that training your body to withstand concussive blows. That actually makes a lot of sense.
Right. And like every sport, like you want to, it's sport specific training, right? After like you get your general like strengthening type exercises, your recovery to get back to, functioning like a normal human being, then you start that sport specific training.
Oh, right. So like you were saying, like for a normal human being, for me to just go walk my dog, we're talking about 12 weeks, but then you have this whole superstructure, an additional strata on top about the actual sports activities, which is dependent upon the sport. Like a baseball,
right.
Yeah, like both a baseball player and a hockey player and a sumo wrestler might start on a bike or whatever, right? Like
right, they'll do bike training.
Yeah,
they'll do
and then move to a treadmill. Yeah.
Box jumps, that kind of thing. But then you get into those sport specific trainings. You get the stamping. You get the
you got to get on ice.
Practice eyes.
Yeah. And if you're a hockey player, eventually you have to get on ice. Whereas for the baseball player, it might stop at the treadmill. Like that's fine. That's the activity they're doing. But a hockey player is like, okay, now I have to be on ice, and now I have to put this tension in my lower body so I can stand up straight and move fast on the ice. And like you're saying, sumo, like It's now about withstanding blows. It's not about like getting a normal range of motion back. That's important, but a dohyo ain't that big.
Right. And I mean, you mentioned range of motion. Something significant about sumo is that not only do these wrestlers have incredible strength, but they also are way more flexible than your average person.
So true. It's astounding when you see someone, again, because by the American perspective, if we saw someone like Koto no Waka walking down the street, you would think, man, that guy is in horrible shape. And then you watch him doing his like ring, the ceremonies or whatever, and like, my man is 6'4", lifting his ankles above his head, like.
Yeah, like this is not typical, like range of motion. You know, like these guys have to be able to, you know, squat down. Like even just the squat at the beginning of a match, right? Like, have you ever tried to assume that position? It's hard.
Yeah, and balance, and then so that's probably a lot in your ankles too.
Mm-hmm. Yep, there's a lot of strength in your ankles and in your hips for that balance.
Yeah. So, okay. So we've seen with Tochinoshin, like, there was both a happy and a sad ending, right? Like, he rose higher than he ever had before that injury in 2013. And even his comeback journey was exciting with 7-0, 7-0, 13-2, 15-0, 4 Yusho in a row, and then a 11-4 Fighting Spirit prize. And then later on, he wins his first ever Yusho and rises to Ozeki. Never does make it to Yokozuna like Hakuho thought he would. But there's the sad ending too. Like, I mean, at least in our friend group, I think a lot of the sumo world's on the same, like, watching, man, 2020 through 2023, like, it sucked watching Tochi for that. That was painful to watch. I did not want to see that.
Yeah.
For as much as I wanted to continue watching him fight, like, that sucked. So Wakatakakage, he carries less weight than Tochinoshin, but Tochinoshin was never one of these Goliaths either. What we know about him is he likes to get grips and then likes to do a lot of twists and throws in a lot of situations, but he will also frog hop like his brother, pushing forward. If you were a trainer for an athlete like Wakatakakage, how would you be advising him to hone his techniques and his fighting style moving forward to ensure the best performance out of that damaged body part, but also to ensure the best longevity for him?
Well, that's complicated, right? Because, like, how long do these guys focus in a particular style of training? For ACL injuries, the most common way to injure your ACL is a pivoting movement.
Oh.
So, like with soccer players and football players, you see that a lot. They'll do their juke or whatever, the step, pivot, turn, change directions very quickly.
Yeah.
And for those, lighter weight wrestlers, Wakatakakage, Tobizaru,
Midori
guys,
Fuji, yeah.
They move so quickly, they're putting a lot more of that pivoting stress rather than, some of your more straight on power wrestlers.
Yeah, an Oshidashi guy, a pusher thruster. Yeah.
Right.
So yeah,
like some of it might be, that sport specific return to sport training. So, working on strengthening those pivoting movements, or if you're, it kind of depends on your shape, right? Like how much do you want to change your fighting style?
Right. It's one of those things that Nick and I have been talking about is so impressive about Hoshoryu is how he is adding weight and adding physicality to his game when he really came up with those pivots and throws. And he still uses those, obviously, but how he's adding new pieces to his game. So the idea and the question being, can Wakatakakage do that? And like you said, we would have no knowledge of that. That's between him, his coach, his brothers, like what they're doing, I guess, in their heya. But
right.
But the thing that we can't deny, that we do know for a fact, like you're saying, is, like, by the numbers, like, you are more likely to re-injure this pivoting, making these motions that apply torque to what is a repaired ligament than doing north-south stuff, which, by the way, Tochinoshin, Very much kind of still was a north-south guy. He was quick off the tachi, but would grab your belt and simply try to move forward and lift. Not quite Oshidashi, but this strength-moving stuff, so that might have been part of his story, whereas Wakatakakage, yeah, now we have to ask ourselves, is he going to lose that part of his game, or has he worked on something else? I mean, I guess we'll know more in Juryo. We'll get a much bigger sample size from him.
Right. And like that, like Tochinoshin, like his return was that north-south movement, right? And that might have been why his return was so stellar, right?
Right, especially against lower tier competition. Yeah.
So we'll just see how Wakatakakage continues to perform.
Yeah, we'll try to cover Wakatakakage more in depth in this first Juryo, this first salaried rank tournament back for him, because I'm really curious for this. And now, thank you, Phil, because now this has given me something to watch for in this tournament. Is what is he doing? Is he pivoting? If he pivots, is it always now on the opposite leg? And we'll see how he handles that moving forward. I think all of us want to see him get back up there, but this does make me a lot more worried about the potential run to Ozeki than I would have been in May of 2022. So, Phil, thanks for enlightening and joining us. Everybody else, thanks for listening, and we'll be back at you soon with a new Bansuke. So, thanks for listening, everybody.